Hi, this is Matt Hogan, and you're listening to Awakened Nation with Brad Zalas.
A huge shift is taking place on planet Earth. People seem to be waking up. Tired of the way things used to be, they are creating something brand new and changing the world we live in. My name is Brad Zalas, and I get to sit down with the next generation of idea makers, the disruptors, and the game changers. Everyday people, just like you and me, from all over, who are doing amazing things. Welcome to Awakened Nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have on today an extraordinary guest, Matt Hogan. How are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm sitting here enjoying this big window in front of me, looking out just over the rooftop, seeing the ocean, and just enjoying my early morning coffee and some time with you, Brad.
Oh, thanks, man. I do appreciate it. Folks, you're in for an extraordinary story. Matt is an alternative lifestyle coach who shows people how to identify and break down socially constructed barriers that prevent them from finding fulfillment, self-mastery, and spiritual wellness in all aspects of their life. I love what you do, man, because we do have a lot of these social constructs that we need to break through. But his personal evolution has become a buzz term. Let me start that over. Haven't you noticed that personal evolution has become this buzz term? You know, self-help, shadow work, all this. It's all become like this buzz term in the recent years. And there's certainly no shortage of coaches out there. I mean, we see them all the time. They're like, hey, you can get high profile clients or whatever. And they have all these approaches and, ranging from wacky to useful. And Matt's journey began after a failed suicide attempt, ultimately taught him the first step on a lifelong path of recovery and discovery, taking radical responsibility for one's own life. Boom. That's the big salvo. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Mr. Matt Hogan.
It's good to be here. I got goosebumps from that intro. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Like you said, boom.
Yeah, I will edit so it's a little crisper, but
Okay.
I like to integrate it with real life. Let's put it that way. Let's start at the beginning. You had a suicide attempt and it was pretty dramatic. Let's start there. What brought you there and how did you try to kill yourself?
I can tell you where I was at that night. It was Thanksgiving night, 2004. I was 18 years old. And at that point in my life, like literally, if you imagine being there with me, those 18 years ago, standing there, and imagine being in your brain and your body, and you have this experience of, I don't see a possibility for a better future for myself. I don't see a way out of this town that I live in, this place that I live in, and I don't see how I can possibly move forward and enjoy my life in any kind of way. That was where I was at. And to summate it a little bit more, it was scarier to be alive than to be dead for me at that point. Not necessarily because of the external surroundings, but because there was so much going on inside of me. If we're all familiar with the term inner critic, self-judgment, guilt, shame, things like that, there was so much of that running through me at that time of my life that it was suffocating. I literally felt like the weight of the world was just pushing me into the dirt. And so that night, with three attempts to pull the trigger, I put a gun to my head, pulled the trigger, click, click, and it finally went off on the third attempt. And that night, when that happened, I remember still to this day that bullet searing my brain, going into my head, and then I fell unconscious. And within a few moments of being unconscious, everything's black. I hear a firm, crisp, confident voice that I had never heard in my life before say, "You will not die today." And that was a voice that was inside of me. And in that moment, I snapped to, I woke up and my whole body just filled with energy. And I stood up and ran up the staircase in the house that I was in and was able to actually get myself to a paramedic to get to the hospital. That's, that's the starting point before even going into anything about my recovery. I had to learn to walk again and a whole bunch of other things. But that was the starting point that if I really want to capture the message, that moment became the springboard that saved my life.
Wow. That's astounding because most people don't try 3 clicks. You really wanted to kill yourself. This is like, whoa. But what brought you to that level in your household? I mean, did you grow up in a really horrible environment, or what was it?
I'll put it this way because I don't speak a lot about what happened with my family when I was young, uh, just because of respect for my family. But that said, I did have in my early years, there was violence that I experienced, and among many other things, that really set the course for uh, not being on the healthiest path growing up,
Right, right.
as well as some early deaths in the family that were really detrimental and devastating to me.
Yeah. So tell me, when you shot yourself, where did the bullet enter? Because if you were you here or here, where was it?
It inserted on the right side of my head towards the back, and then
Yeah.
is lodged in my brain towards the left side on the left side.
So it's still in your brain.
Correct.
Okay.
As I say, something I haven't said yet that I have alluded to, that I've been on a journey essentially the past 18 years of overcoming. It's
Mhm.
been overcoming my past. It's been overcoming being broke. It's been overcoming hurting. It's been overcoming my own self hatred. It's been overcoming all this pain and all this perception of limitation.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing now I'm finally at this point, this pivotal point in my life where I'm in the early stages of experiencing what it's like to not have to overcome anything any longer. It is no longer about overcoming anything. It's about just enjoying my life.
That's powerful that you said that simply because a lot of people have this inner critic. And some people, they have a little inner critic, and some people have a giant inner
Mhm.
critic that is just destroying their life.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've worked at overcoming that, a very giant inner critic.
Yeah. When I was young, it was so loud in my head that I used to beat my head into brick walls and things to try to silence it.
Hmm.
That's how loud that inner critic was for me when I was young.
Yeah.
And over time, I've watched that to imagine there being a shape and size of the inner critic. I've watched it shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And now it's still there from time to time, but it is something I can look at and go, I hear what you're doing. I see you. I know what that is. I know that ain't me.
It's very interesting that you say that because that inner critic, they say there's a small percentage of the population that doesn't have that inner voice that most of us have. And
Mm.
some of you who are listening are sitting there going, what are you talking about? What inner voice? You're not saying that out loud. That's that voice right there.
The voice that you think is you.
Yeah. And it's some people cultivate that and listen to that, and that becomes inner guidance. And other people are like, you're not good enough. You could never do that. And tell that voice to shut up. Am I right?
I mean, that's the mistake the misunderstanding is that that voice is actually who we are in the reality of the world. And that is not true.
Boom. Yeah, that's heavy. But I'm always fascinated to hear that there is a small percentage of the population that has no inner voice, no inner dialogue, period.
I'd like to experience what it is to be them just for one day, just so I could what has this lifespan been like?
Silent.
Cozy in here,
There
like warm blanket and some hot tea.
you go. That's almost like I forget there's a preacher that talks about men's brains and women's brains, and he says men brains work very differently. We have little boxes for everything. And when we're working on a car, we pull that box out, and that's the car box. We work on that. And he goes, and then there's this box that has nothing in it. And he says, and we pull that one out when we're fishing. And he said, men can literally not think about something. They can go blank. We have that ability. He says, women don't have that ability because both their hemispheres, they have, the way their brains are built, they can actually communicate. Both hemispheres communicate equally with each other. He says, so a woman's brains looks like Christmas tree lights. And he explains it scientifically. And I just found that hilarious because it's like, yeah, we are very different physically in the way we think and act and emote, I guess would be the best word.
And also what helps us thrive in our life.
Yeah. Yeah. We have different angles, different approaches, different ways of being and doing. And that I find incredibly fascinating.
I love it. It'd be boring if we were all the same.
Ain't that the truth, brother? Ain't that the truth? Folks, if you're suffering from depression, or you're going through something heavy, this is a good episode for you to listen in, and even reach out to Matt. So let's move on. You get to a paramedic and you're in the hospital. You had to learn to walk. What were the steps after that? I mean, did you have an epiphany of what just happened? Or was it a slow kind of I hate to say it, come to Jesus moment, as they say metaphorically?
Not really. Imagine waking up after being in a coma for 2 weeks. You're staring at a hospital ceiling. You can't move. And there's people just standing around you, staring at you, looking at you with sympathy. And then one of the first things you hear is, wow, it's amazing you're alive and you may never walk again. And within the first couple of days, as the morphine they had me on began to wear off, I remember being wheeled outside in my wheelchair, my foot like dangling down off the edge of the chair because I had no feeling in my legs. And they put me on the roof of the hospital where it was the smoking area. And I smoked at the time. And I remember this moment like it was yesterday. I was sitting there smoking a cigarette, and it just really hit me. I had spent so much time angry at myself, angry at the world, blaming everyone for my problems, blaming everything, and just feeling this overwhelming sense of powerlessness about my life. And I remember in that moment when it finally clicked and it said, you put yourself here. It doesn't matter what happened to you when you were young. You put yourself here. You put the trigger gun to your head and you pulled it. And that moment when I took full responsibility and accepted my actions for why I was there, I had like crocodile-sized tears.
Wow.
Pouring down my face, soaking my cigarette, soaking my hospital gown, and it's this cold winter night and I'm sitting out there. And that was when that same voice that spoke to me the night I shot myself came back and it said, you are not meant to live this way. And in that moment, I felt that same fire pour through my entire body. Like imagine a really warm feeling you've ever felt, or a really excited feeling you ever felt that just reached your whole body. I had one of those moments, and it just, from head to toe, my whole body just lit up. And this motivation, this inspiration, this drive to have a good life just showed up. This feeling of that something is possible for me, a better life is possible for me, just was born in that moment. And I don't try to explain it away. I just know that's what happened. Right. And that became another springboard moment for me, that then I immediately made the decision, I will walk again. And I spent the next few weeks with that devotion, falling on the floor, doing everything I could to find my way back to walking again. And within a few weeks, I took my first steps on my father's birthday as I walked towards him. And that was one of the most meaningful moments of my life, when he got to see me walk, because I saw how devastating it was for him for me to be there in the hospital. And that was really the beginning point before the rest of the past 18 years of what really set me up for.
What did the hospital staff think when you had this crazy idea you were going to walk again? What were they thinking? Did they kind of go, oh, okay?
There were a few people that were just well-intentioned. They're like, don't push so hard, take it easy. And they were trying to be kind, but I experienced it as, no, I don't want to be comfortable right now. I want to move. I want to walk. And so even though they were trying to just offer gentleness and kindness, this fire in me wouldn't let me sit still. Right. And so I ended up within about a week and a half connecting with an occupational therapist that actually advocated, keep going, keep doing this. And within a couple of weeks, I was walking and taking those first steps. But all along, regardless of what everyone was saying, the most important thing for me in hindsight was I knew inside of myself I was going to walk again, and no one could convince me otherwise.
That's the commitment of the mind. Sometimes mind over matter. I've seen it where somebody says, you're never going to do this again, or that's over, and they get up and do it. I had a scoutmaster when I was a Boy Scout, I was a teenager. And one of our assistant scoutmasters who would go on hikes with us, he had been a Marine in Vietnam, and he had injured his back, and he had back surgery. And they said, you're never going to be able to do a sit up again or do any of this, and you won't be able to go to work. Well, the first day after surgery, he crawled out of bed in agony and did one sit up. The next day, he did 2 sit ups. The day after that, he did 3 sit ups. So I can see you with this tenacity, this I won't give up attitude, and this awakening that took place inside of you. I can visualize it as you tell it. It's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Something I want to throw in here, because I know this is about what this podcast is about, is there's no shortage of people emerging in our society today that are showing how they've healed themselves, how they've healed their body, how they have. Joe Dispenza is a great example. A man that broke his spine in a bicycle accident and then healed his own spine through the power of meditation, his mind, and there's more nuance. But
right,
there's more and more people here, kind of like the guy that said the 4-minute mile was impossible until someone broke the 4-minute mile, and then a whole bunch of people started breaking it after that.
Right. You're so right. We're in a day and age. It's it's strange on one hand, and it's exhilarating on another, because I see gurus stepping up to the plate who are selling snake oil. And then I see some people stepping up, and they're being incredibly authentic in their healing modalities, what they've learned. We're in a very different day and age right now, where we're aging differently. I just turned 60, and I've reversed a lot of damage in my body from things I didn't even know were happening. And the information is out there. That's what I'm getting at. The information is at our fingertips. Someone like you, you had to live through this extraordinary journey to be able to become a teacher. And that's what I love about having you on the show today. I want to ask you something, because I know when people go through heartache or pain or homelessness or what you went through, the look on your family's face shifted. They probably didn't know anything about your depression or anything like that. Did you notice a shift? You had mentioned your father. And did you notice a shift in the way your family looked at you, treated you? Did anything change?
After the fact?
Yeah.
After I shot myself and I came out of the hospital, I'll be honest, I became so focused on creating a life for myself that I didn't pay a lot of attention to what my family was saying or doing. Mm-hmm. I do know that my father and I had, he paid quite a bit of attention towards me in the first couple months before I left and go to college, mm-hmm. which was inspired by me shooting myself. But I don't know how much they changed, because I became very focused on building a life. I actually stopped really paying attention to my family at all.
Right. Would you say that was what saved you? You had to put up a solid boundary. Because I grew up kind of, a bumpy childhood. And did you find that setting up a hard cement-like boundary helped you survive and move forward?
Ultimately, what came to be real for me was, while I was in the hospital recovering and going through like the physical therapy and everything, I knew that I had to get out of my hometown. Mm-hmm. I was heavily involved with drugs and was heavily involved with a crowd that I knew if I stayed around, I would die. I was either going to be in prison or dead. And so my time in the hospital became a chance for me to consider, like, what the hell am I doing with my life from here? And that, when you're 18, often that next step either feels like you're going into a career or you're going into university, you're going to college in our society. And I chose a trade school. And that for me felt like I needed to escape or I was going to die. And so that was like that first point of moving beyond my origin story that felt like a prison to me at the time.
So this is the hero's journey that we're tuning into, if you're listening. Matt Hogan is explaining how he survived suicide, learned to walk again, and decided, hey, I need a higher purpose here. And the university was it. So let's talk about this. How did you grow at college and move into the space that you're in now? I mean, I know it wasn't overnight. It's another 18-year journey, but how did you pick up some of these skills, these teaching modalities that you learned through the years?
I think it's important for me to note, because we were talking about like gurus and people offering teachings and all that. There's so much increasingly available that shows the possibility of what we really are and what we can really do as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
That at the end of the day, though, it always comes back to our connection with our own inner teacher, our own inner guidance system. You can call it intuition, you can call it soul. I don't care what you call it, but we all have it within us, that still small voice that says, this is right for you. This is wrong for you. This is what you really need. And I've spent the past near 20 years cultivating that relationship. So at the end of the day, no matter what anyone says or offers, we have to know our own inner guidance system. And that has literally been the through line for me these past near 20 years is, what am I being guided to next? What is right for me next? And I didn't always get it right, but I always learned something that got me back on the path. Mm-hmm. And so that's my like core teaching that I offer anyone I work with. And that is also a core of what I guide my daily life with. So that's the first piece. And so there's a lot of lessons that I've picked up there in the past near 20 years. From that, when I look at the past 18 years too, I can almost compartmentalize it in that I first began my intellectual journey and my skills-based journey. And what I mean by that, I was hungry. I was hungry to learn. I was like, when that fire lit me, I'm like, I'm ready to learn. I'm going to feed my mind. I didn't consider myself very smart, but I was ready to learn and grow my brain and intellectual capacity. So my time through college and even through my time through corporate, I took in learning anything I could, anything that could develop a valuable skill set that helped me build a sustainable financial life for myself that felt like I was growing into something. And so for me, a lot of what came out of that time was an understanding of how to navigate developing skills, how to navigate creating focus, how to literally pour myself into something that I say is important to me. Mm-hmm. And along the way, of course, with corporate and school and everything, I had to learn how to communicate. I had to learn how to navigate relationships in a way that allowed me to support my life. And so like really my 20s were spent largely on how do I build skills? How do I set my sights on something and go after it? And then how do I navigate the world of relationships and communication to serve it? Not just me, but serve people around me. And that's really my 20s. But the interesting thing for me was I remember being 19 and I was in the college parking lot. The first degree I chose was automotive. I was going to work on cars.
Right.
And I had done some of that before I was in the hospital. And I was like, oh, that feels like a safe bet. And I remember being halfway through the first quarter and I'm like, I can't do this. Like I'm not meant to work on cars for a living. And I remember needing to change my major, and I chose to change my major to computer networking because I had this vision that showed up that said, I'm not meant to be a computer networker, but I'm meant to lead a team of tech people who are techie. Right. And so that actually pulled me through college, that knowing that I was going to do that, and actually manifested, to use a word, or came to be real in my corporate career. And so I learned a lot of skills around what it means to, just to put it simply and succinctly, focus, set an intention, find what's important to me, and navigate communicating in relationships and feed a hunger that you have.
Something just came. Yeah, what's that?
That's my 20s.
Yeah, I find this fascinating, and I thought upon this. I thought about this for years. When people go through an extraordinary childhood where they don't get all the happy stuff you see in a Hallmark film, and they get all the emotional crap thrust on them. Sorry, I'm not using more technical jargon, but they get emotional crap thrust on them. They've had loss, they lose their whatever, parents, grandparents. They go through horrific, maybe sexual abuse, things like this. I find that when they get into their 20s, they're not living their life like other people. Like they're on a mission to really absorb and learn and grow, while it seems like other people are just kind of flowing through life. And case in point, I have friends who are calling me today, going through problems and asking my advice, stuff I went through when I was 10 and 12 and 18 years of age. Do you find that's true for you, that sometimes you have friends that they look to you for answers simply because you've already gone through that at a very young age?
The reality is my friend group has evolved greatly over the past couple of decades. And what I mean by that is I tend to have a friend group for a period of a couple of years, and then I don't have a friend group for a while. And then I have a different friend group for a couple of years because I've just been so dedicated to this pull to grow for so long that my friendships just tend to not last for very long at this point. They're starting to shifting differently now where I'm at in this point in my life, but largely my friendships haven't lasted long enough to say they're asking me advice. That said, my clients, however, many of my clients are in their late 40s, early 50s, and some in their 60s, and they're asking for support from me with things that I was working through in my 30s and 20s. And so that is a reality for me.
I find that interesting simply because I've noticed it for myself as well. And you're shifting from friendships to friendships is because you are shifting in consciousness. The law of attraction doesn't just work with manifestation. It also works with who's your circle of friends. What are your boundaries? What are your standards? And when you shift and change so quickly, you begin to attract a new set of friends, and the old friends don't match you anymore. There's no matchup. The puzzle pieces don't align. And this is why some people go through one relationship after another. They're either super dysfunctional or they're growing super fast, right? One or the other. So thank you for sharing. I really enjoy the fact that you are sharing some of your deepest things with us. So let's talk a little bit about how you coach people, because you, in your bio, you talk about, a lot of these people are using some of the buzzwords and the hot stuff that everybody's talking about, but you are coming in with sort of a reality-based, let's work on this, let's do a deep dive into radical responsibility. So let's talk about that. What does that look like for a person who comes to work with you?
The main question I have for anyone I work with is, what is it that you need and want to fall absolutely in love with your life? I mean, ultimately, because that is, if I look at these past near 2 decades, it has all been about me growing towards a life that I can say, I am damn proud of this life. And that when I die and take my last breath, I'm like, I lived, and I lived the best I could. And so I really have been on this path of like, what's going to allow me to experience peace? What's going to allow me to wake up and smile at the life I'm living and let go of all the pain, all the hurt, all the shame, all the blame, all that stuff that we do not have to live with. And so anytime I meet with someone, it's what's going to allow you to fall in love with your life? And because if someone's in love with their life, what else do you need?
How have you helped your clients? I mean, that's got to be rough, because I know a lot of people will sit there and they're listening and they're going, well, you can't just live the life you want. You got to do this. You got to do that. How do you break through that resistance?
Bit by bit. First, I really want to know. Good question. First, I want to know about the resistance, because the resistance itself is an entry point to what they're actually wanting.
Yeah.
So we often look at what's missing in our life as the issue, but it's actually the resistance that's the problem. And so if we can actually work with the resistance and get clear on it and release it, things move. And so you can sit here and tell me that, oh, you can't just live the life you want. Great. Tell me more about that disbelief.
Yeah.
Let's find where that's bogus. And then let's help you walk your daily life so you can prove that it's bogus to yourself.
Yeah. I come from a small town as well. And so I'm always fascinated by what Somebody said this to me one day. They go, "You're so lucky. You just got up and left." And they go, "How did you do that?" And it's like, it was easy. I packed a suitcase and I got on a train to New York City. I mean, it was literally, I just wanted adventure. I wanted to move forward in life. And I love the fact that you're talking about this, that resistance. What's another common area of resistance that you run into with your clients?
I see resistance show up in many ways. It's resistance. I'm sitting here just feeling for all the different ways that we exist as human beings. And one of the biggest resistance I see is as a core piece. I can say we resist money. I can say we resist intimacy, and we resist feeling good. And those are all true. But the biggest things we resist is our own truth of our own capacity. And that capacity comes from cultivating that relationship with your inner guidance that I was talking about. And so resisting that is like a core resistance that blocks everything else.
Do you think people do that because of society shaming them into sort of like, well, who do you think you are? Our parents, or maybe, if you become a millionaire, heaven forbid, you might be happy. What do you think is that core influence sometimes?
I can sit here and blame it on conditioning and say it's society and say it's parents. But here's the reality. We spend our entire lives in our own head and in our bodies. And unless we actually become clear on the way that we do our life and the way we perceive our life and the games we play with ourselves, we're going to stay stuck in our own endless circles and cycles that don't take us anywhere.
Yeah. You said a mouthful, man.
I mean, and I say that as someone that used to blame everything and everyone for what I don't have and what I don't feel. And the reality is, yes, the world influences me. And the reality is, I am the only one that can choose anything other than what I'm experiencing and can choose another life for myself.
That's powerful, folks. If you're taking notes, remember, you can choose a different life for yourself. That's rough sometimes because people are dealing with dysfunctional relationships, the fear of letting go of a friendship that no longer serves you. You don't want to be alone. The fear of being alone, I think, drives a lot of people to not make change. Would you say that's true?
I do. And, one of the most challenging and rewarding parts of my life, and I will say that there is a bit of a difference between the way men and women actualize their potential. And one of the things I experienced as a man, and I've seen differently like with the women I work with, is that for me, I really had to come to a place where I was completely happy being alone and single. And I spent a good part of these past 2 decades single. One was because of it's hard to be in a partnership where one person's wanting to grow and another is not. And it was also just because of things I need to work through. I spent the last six and a half years single after my fiance left me in 2017, because I knew that I would never have a functional life, an enjoyable life, if I couldn't learn how to be happy by myself. And so I just recently, in the past few months, gotten into a relationship for the first time in many years, when I finally got to a point where I'm like, I'm happy and content with my life by myself. When I finally got to that point and I wasn't looking for anything, I wasn't seeking anything, then I met someone, which is often the story, right? And I met someone that wants to grow together. And it's like that deeply aligned relationship where it's not going to be something we outgrow each other in 6 months. And I say that because that fear of being alone is something that we need to go into, meaning that fear of being alone is something that's holding us back because we're not facing it, we're not letting it go, and we're not letting ourselves feel what's really there.
It's powerful what you're talking about, especially for the men listening. A lot of times we think we have to go to the gym and get a 6-pack set of abs and work out. And I look at it this way. As someone who's done a lot of shadow work and delved into my own stuff, I think a lot of young men nowadays especially are confused as to what their role is in society. They're yearning for learning about what it means to really truly be a man. I'm not talking about toxic masculinity. I'm talking about men who really sit solidly within their masculine energy, enjoy that energy, and learn to be alone. This is very hard for a lot of men. They go through a consistent set of partners simply because it's hard to face yourself. Let's be honest. I did some of that in my 20s. I didn't want to face myself. The only good thing is my father prepared me to be alone. I don't know how he did this. He figured it out, but he felt that a man should know how to cook, take care of the house, your car, all this other stuff by yourself. You don't need a woman for certain things, but so that you are prepared to be a good partner. And that's stuck in my mind through the years. And I'm so glad you now feel you're ready for a relationship. And isn't it funny how you attract when you're not looking?
I'll say this just for the men listening. The biggest space that our feeling of freedom that many of us yearn for inside of ourselves comes from not being owned by anything in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We can own ourselves. We can own our energy. We can own our responses, our reactions, our feelings, and own our life. Truly own our center of gravity. That's where our freedom comes from. Not being owned by our money, by our career, by our relationships. Those are great things to enjoy in this lifetime. But if we are owned by them, we will forever be falling and collapsing into something that is outside of our own center.
Mm-hmm. And that's when we get frustrated and angry and snap, and we don't feel like we're in control of our own destiny and our own life.
Right.
Yeah. What do you find is the number one thing that you have to work with when you work with women?
More and more of this emerges, and this is why I love the work I do, because I don't believe that any of us ever arrive to some destination. I'm like, I know everything. The moment I hear someone, or I believe that I know everything, I know that I know nothing. Because I'm shown every day when I pay attention something I didn't know. And what I find with the women I work with is it's that right now desire of how do I experience more of the flow of love in my life, while also being able to have a level of independence in the work I do, to run the business I love, to work with the people I want to work with, to have the impact I want. So there's this edge of how do I have both? How do I feel love flowing through my life? And how do I actualize work that means something to me?
We're in a very different day and age now, because in the past, women had to be dedicated to a man in order to survive, in order to have a life. You just focused on your man, took care of that. And then the man's job was to go out and provide, the house, the car, whatever. And we've shifted now into a modern world where women no longer need men for that. Mm-hmm. Okay. So they can make the same amount of money. They can, have careers and start businesses, and it's socially acceptable now. So they can walk into any room and stand tall and not have to explain themselves. So the idea of having a partner has shifted for both men and women, because men today, they have reached a point where they don't need women to teach them how to be nurturing or how to be better. They actually have these tools that they grow up with now. We have therapy. We have teachers that in schools that teach them how to communicate better. Men have shifted in society as well. So our roles have shifted so dramatically. We don't come together for marriage for the same reasons we did, let's say, even 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Wouldn't you say that's true on some level?
Yeah, there's a great book called The Way of the Superior Man by David Guetta. I don't know if you've read it, but he speaks about at the very beginning of the book how initially there was the norm that the men basically overpowered women. They would disrespect, they would try to control, manipulate, and men and women both have their own ways of doing things to create power struggles. But that was largely the norm, men manipulating and overpowering women for a while. And then, as you said, there's been this big shift, and continuing to be a shift, of women doing work for themselves, actualizing their own potential, their own purpose, their own impact. And as that's happening, there's a lot of men that are now feeling demasculated because they're like, well, who am I if I'm not valued by the work I do, the money I provide? And so
Right.
men are having to try to find a new way to bring their own value into the world that is not based on being in control and dominating over someone's life. And
Right.
so I think it's a beautiful thing that works very symbiotically. A little chaos, of course, but it's a gift
Yeah.
because then it actually gives a chance for a whole redefinition of a partnership and a
Yeah.
relationship that works both with the energy of the masculine and the feminine in a way that serves both people's potential coming to life, where their lives thrive. And guess what? The family unit can thrive and our society can thrive in a whole new way when we are willing to pause and take a look at ourselves and take more ownership for ourselves.
It's a whole new world, man. Because I can tell you right now, my girlfriend's a little bit younger than me, and she loves working on cars. Like she works on cars. Like it's not even a thought in her mind. Like she knows what bolts to use, what to remove. We've removed on both our vehicles. We've removed the carpeting and the seats because we're replacing everything. And she knows everything. And I'm standing there like, So, and she's very feminine. She's from Vietnam. She has long black hair, beautiful. But she loves to get in there with a wrench and get dirty. And that used to be it's the man's job to do that.
Right.
And I, on the other hand, I take care of everything else. And we find our structures within our love for each other that work for us.
Right.
And that's what you have to do. I'm still the man, and she's still the woman. But there are these little skills and strengths. I let her have them because
Right.
they're just so wonderful to watch. And I learn from her, Here I am. My dad didn't teach me jack about fixing a car. I'm
Right.
learning it from her. So it's a great time right now.
It is a great time. And we're in a time where relationships can become so rewarding and so meaningful too.
Mm-hmm.
And, as long as we can be mindful and aware of the balancing energies of the relationship where it's cultivating and generating life enforcing energy rather than life constricting energy, we can have an amazing life together. And guess
Mm-hmm.
what? When you have a bunch of couples and partners that are creating this in the world, guess what kind of families we create? Guess what kind of
Right.
businesses we create in a society?
Yeah.
And so it's a really exciting time. And going back to what we've been talking about here as a through line of what I experienced personally is a lifetime of me freeing myself internally, largely, so I can have more of an external freedom. When we can do the deep inner work and introspection and connection with ourselves, we can shift our life around us much more effortlessly. But we have to walk them both at the same time.
Wow. Boom. That's powerful. We can live an extraordinary life. I know a lot of you who are listening, you might be older and you might be sitting there a little depressed and you might be saying to yourself, well, this is great and all, but how does that affect me? That thought alone is something that maybe you can look at because what Matt provides is something that I feel is that powerful mind shift that you've seen samurai warriors use. You've seen people who've been paralyzed use. You've seen people, they've brought it up in movies as if it's some sort of magic, and it's really this power of the mind. From Napoleon Hill to Emile Coué in France to Dale Carnegie, the power of the mind is what transforms our reality. And you are living that, Matt. I find that fascinating that you learn intuitively, I'm going to walk. I'm going to save my own life. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to do that. All these things that you've told us about in this interview have been a huge shift in mindset, along with determination and focus and the clarity of what you want.
Right.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that. Do you teach this same methodology as well, how you manifest the life you want?
The way I work with my clients right now, whether it's in group or individual format, um, I do use my personal experience to offer ideas potentially,
Mm-hmm.
or kind of guideposts. Like if we're getting a little too off track, to offer point them back. But the through line of everything I do with clients is first helping them cultivate that relationship with their own inner guidance, because there's no matter what I say or offer, if it does not land as true and right for them, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so a big portion of my work, and I could spend, the whole, like I have a client that I've been with for some time, and we continue to go to new layers of it. And as we go to new layers of it, guess what? His career is getting better. He's making more money. Life feels better. His body feels healthier. He's making love with his partner. Like that cultivation of that inner teacher is like the first and foremost core of everything I do.
Yeah.
We then can take that into like, how do you communicate? How do you actually have crucial conversations with yourself in a way that allow you to shift your life? And then I can help. And then the action and the implementation stuff I help with, that's the easy part. It's the inner work that I work with people first. And when we do that and they see who they really are and remember who the hell they are, not all these thoughts about depression, not all these fears, the real them, their lives open up.
That's incredible. I've watched a coaching session, a mastermind group once, and I remember watching the advice come from one coach that resonated completely with the person. They just sat there and they were like, yes, and they were taking notes and they were so excited. And then the coach next to them interjected, and his advice was so way beyond this person's knowledge-based consciousness, or even the ability to just take that first step, that you could see the guy suddenly now his head was spinning, literally spinning. Do you find clients that you have like that, where you have to start where they're at, is really what it is?
I always have to start where they're at. Otherwise it doesn't work. And it's useless for no waste of time and money for them.
Yeah. How do you help somebody get through a poverty consciousness?
One of the things that's taken me a while to really, truly get and shift is that we spend often too much time looking at the past. We spend too much time analyzing what was instead of looking at how is it presenting itself in the present moment. And so if someone has poverty consciousness or scarcity consciousness, it's ultimately when we feel poverty is a part of our consciousness, it's due to a lack of love. It's due to a lack of trust. And so when someone tells me they're fearful of money, they're fearful of being able to have money, make money, spend money, all those things, I'm going to point them in the direction of where they're not loving themselves. Because when we love ourselves, we do not have scarcity of our money consciousness issues like that. And that's been my own personal experience. As I have walked this path and have found that I go deeper and deeper into what it is to embrace myself, to love myself where I'm at, no matter what's happening in my world. That thing I used to chase and call, I have scarcity mind, was literally my own inability to love myself.
Wow. That is profound, Matt. Thank you. Thank you so much for laying that out there. Because, I have to work with corporate clients. I don't do the work you do. I do more the corporate coaching, entrepreneurs. And I got to tell you, moving into that abundance space, you just enlightened me. You just enlightened me on how to approach that differently now. So thank you.
I wonder, something I'm wondering might be useful for everyone listening, because I know that it's your inspiration and your devotion that has us here today. You've been creating this for some time.
Thank you.
And I'm just a guy showing up for one conversation, but you're the man that's consistently here. And people listen to you. And so I wonder what's helped you along your way to cultivate your own inner guidance system that helps you align and guide your life in a way that feels right for you.
Wow. Thanks for asking. What has started out in my childhood, my stepfather was a first generation Hungarian, born in America. So communication was hard sometimes with him because he wanted everything one way. And then my mother being bipolar, I couldn't sit down and have a mother-son relationship. And so through the years, as I've worked on myself and I've tried to talk to people, that frustration of communication reared its ugly head during the 90s, during the dot-com boom, when I was meeting a new generation that didn't want to think or act like a boomer. And I decided to write a book. And that book, the reason I wrote that was to wake up my baby boomer brethren to the shifts and the changes that they just could not see were taking place. But deep inside, there was always that driving force of communication. I wanted to hear from other people what was changing, what was shifting, what was driving them that was completely different that I may not understand. Looking for that aha moment, so to speak. And for many, many years, I was on podcasts and I was either a host or a guest, probably on about 100 of them. And people said, you should have your own podcast. You should have your own podcast. And much like you, I didn't feel I had to go down that road yet until it was time. Like there was a moment that I knew I was going to do it. I just didn't know when it was going to be. And I sat down with a friend of mine and she kind of said, okay, you want to have a podcast and maybe it's time. I said, well, I don't want to have podcasts like other people where they just go, do you know how successful I am? Let me tell you how successful I am. I don't want that. I want that conversation where the guy talks about falling off a cliff and almost dying, or the person who had to overcome alcoholism, lost everything. Yeah, he has a successful company today, but what did he overcome to get here? That's a much more interesting conversation than just the back end of the conversation where we're sitting there looking at where they arrived. I want to hear how they got there. And so that driving need in me that's always been there. I love people. So there's that. I get that from my grandfather and my mom. They just were people persons. But I guess I inherited some of that love for people and the need to hear their story. So thank you for asking that question. No one's ever asked me why I do this. But and if you notice that we've had some really, really interesting guests on the show. We've had Panache Desai on. We've also had Dan Millman, who wrote The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. We've had Brian Smith on, who created Uggs. And I always want to hear that spiritual conversation. And I know that maybe spiritual is not the right word, but with Brian Smith as a good example, he got kicked out of his own company and was so depressed. His wife yelled at him one night because he crawled to bed on his hands and knees. She goes, "You get up and you walk like a man." They're Australian, so I have to do the accent. But I those stories fascinate me because I guess myself, I'm kind of sitting here saying to myself, how would I have handled that? How would I have gone through that tragedy of pain or depression? It's an interesting, I find the human race fascinating. Let's put it that way. If I can be an observer of everything, but thank you for asking that.
We are fascinating creatures, aren't we?
We really are, and the more I delve into male, female, the different types of brains and where people come from, and I've had DISC training, DISC, behavioral communication training. I look at what drives the inner core of a person. So that helps me ask questions that they don't get asked a lot of times, because I hate surface conversations. I want to go a little deeper.
Yeah, it's clear from your sharing that expression, curiosity, understanding, and depth are really important to you.
Yeah, they're very much so. Very much so.
Very clear.
You nailed it. You see, this is what it's like to work with this guy. I lived in New York for 35 years. So sometimes I'm like, hey, how you doing? Real quick, how do people get a hold of you, Matt? Where should they go?
Well, there's a couple options. I would first offer that, for anyone right now that is feeling stuck and they're feeling like they don't have any clarity or direction or a way forward, and they felt like it resonated with them wanting to cultivate that relationship with their inner teacher, something that I've been working on for the past 2 decades. They can go to matthoganworldwide.com/clarity and download a free guide that I offer that will it's a workbook that will help them actually start to cultivate their own way forward. That's one option. And if they want to email me directly, it's matt@matthoganworldwide.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Reach out to Matt, ladies and gentlemen. He's an excellent coach. He can help you get unstuck and move forward. So please take a moment. And by the way, you deserve this. This is a little bit of self-love. Men and women, just reach out to him. That'll help. We now do a lightning round on this show where I ask you a few questions so we get to know you better. And the first question I'm going to ask is, I believe, whether you believe in God or not, I believe that each soul, when we come into this planet, into this physical body, we have a mission. And that mission, we almost have a driving need to fulfill it. Are you fulfilling your mission, do you feel?
I am.
Mm-hmm. When do you feel that you felt that? Was it right after the bullet went into your head, or was it when you kind of woke up in the hospital?
I'll put it this way. What I have discovered about my mission in life is I've spent the past near 2 decades literally living a message of what it is to free myself, to free my mind, to free my body, my emotions, my spirit, my finances, everything. Yeah. And that is the path I continue to walk and will continue to walk for the rest of my life. And so what I have come to really get clear on is when I spend time with people, it's not that my way is the right way. It's just that my life and the experience of being around me is an invitation for people to free themselves.
Powerful, brother. Very powerful. My second question is, what is your favorite memory?
One of my favorite memories would have to be when I left corporate in 2018 and I decided to sell what little belongings I had in Austin, Texas, and buy a one-way ticket out of the US. That day when I was taking off on the tarmac, and I just had that moment where I go, what the hell did I just do? That was great, because that was the beginning of a 1-year trip outside of the US. But that's a fun memory that I'll never forget.
It's almost like the voice of everybody else in your life is going, what the hell is wrong with him? You know, it's like you get up one day and you say, I'm going on an adventure. That's it.
Hungry for adventure.
That's funny. That's really good. At the end of your life, this is my final question. At the end of your life, what do you want your legacy to be, or to be remembered for?
When I get to the end of my life, it's a few things. It's one, have I got to the point where I fully have allowed in the love that I know I deserve as a human being, that I deserve just through my own very nature of existence? And have I dedicated my life to sharing and giving that freely with people in the world?
Thank you. That's deep, Matt. Thank you. Thank you for being on Awakened Nation. How do we reach out to you again? Where should we go?
My guide that you can download is matthoganworldwide.com/clarity. And my email is matt@matthoganworldwide.com.
Excellent. Reach out to Matt. Do not hesitate. This is powerful. Get the guide. Because it's time to change your life. I don't care if you're 70. I don't care if you're 20. You need someone, a mentor, someone who can guide you through these rocks, these rocky shoals, as they say. Thank you, Matt, for being on Awakened Nation, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Brad. This has been a fun one.
Good. Hey, everybody, tune in next week. We have another extraordinary guest here on Awakened Nation. And season 5 is... let me tell you, it's been lit so far. But thank you. Tune in next week, my friends.
Thank you so much for being a big part of the Awakened Nation movement. This is how you can help me and our extraordinary guests. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And let's grow this movement by word of mouth. Our success will be because of you. Thank you, and see you next week.